Alrighty, hello everybody. We are officially kicking off. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us for this Make Renting Fair campaign relaunch. It's great to see so many of you here with us, and people keep joining, and hopefully people will be coming along on Facebook as well. For those who don't know me, I'm Riley. I'm Policy and Campaigns Officer at the Tenants Union of New South Wales. Many of you will have been hearing from me over the past few weeks or months, some of you quite incessantly. It's nice to be able to start putting faces to names and voices. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I am joining today from the beautiful Gadigal country, where I'm so lucky to live and work. I'd like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging of this country. And I'd also like to acknowledge that wherever on this beautiful continent you're joining from today, you're joining from unceded Aboriginal land. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging of all of the countries that you're joining from today. So of course, it's always important to keep in mind that this was and always will be Aboriginal land over which sovereignty has never been ceded. And in the conversation about renting and housing justice, it's important to keep in mind that while all renters, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, need a safe, secure place to call home, I think we all know that Aboriginal renters are faced with many additional barriers a lot of the time, including discrimination, historical dispossession, unequal distribution of resources, and so much more. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that while we are fighting for housing justice for all, it's important to hold space for how complex it is and the complexity of what it means, and what that looks like and how we go about that while we are all on stolen land. So I would like to encourage everyone to now put in the chat what country you're joining us from, what you love most about the country you're joining us from, and also which renting issue you're most passionate about. I'd love to hear from you. Just to start off with a little bit of housekeeping. As I said to the waiting room, you are muted and you will not be able to unmute yourselves just because there are so many people in this Zoom. I think we've all been in Zooms where people have forgotten to mute themselves, and there's children or pets or whatever. So avoiding all of that. That being said, we do want to hear from you. We want this to be interactive. So we strongly encourage conversations, questions, comments, your input, your ideas, your knowledge into the chat. We will be saving the chat. And so we'd love to hear from you. A note on that, as we are saving the chat, it automatically will save quote unquote private messages. I can't turn that off, it will do that. So just letting you know that if you are private messaging your friend, I will be able to see that. So don't privately insult me, because I will see it and I will cry. If you want to ask a question to one of the presenters, just to make things easy, as we're hoping the chat will kind of have a lot going on, it'd help us if you write question and a colon in front of the question. And we'll know that that's a question that you want to put to one of the speakers. That being said as well, though, I know that in this room there is so much knowledge and experience about renting. And so if you ask a question to the chat, there's a really good chance that someone else in the chat will also be able to give you some really useful information as well. As I also put in the waiting room, we are recording this and we are sharing on Facebook Live. So I completely understand if that means you'd rather turn your camera off, but I would love it if as many people as possible leave your cameras on. It's great to see kind of a whole big sea of faces, which I am seeing at the moment, rather than the kind of black squares, so that's great. If you wanted to give this event a little bit of a boost, it would be great if you could pop over to Facebook and give a share to the live stream. I'll put the link to that in the chat, and once I do, it'd be great if you can hop over to Facebook or any other social media and share the live so your Facebook friends can follow along and join in there. If you have any technical issues at any point, please email contact@rentingfair.org.au. I'll also put that in the chat in a minute. And Jeremy, who is here, will hopefully be able to help you out with your issues. Lastly, this almost definitely goes without saying, but please keep things polite. Please avoid racism, sexism, homophobia. Please don't do anything to make us remove you, because unfortunately we will if it becomes an unsafe space. And with that, I would love to now pass over to Leo Patterson-Ross, who is the CEO of the Tenants Union of New South Wales. He is fantastic. He'll be facilitating tonight's event. So take it away, Leo.
Thanks so much, Riley, and thanks everyone for coming. We've got over 50 people in the chat, which is awesome so far. So I'd like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from Terramerigal country in the north of what's now called Sydney. And to introduce the night, so tonight is really the relaunching of our Make Renting Fair campaign in New South Wales. And We're starting out this phase by exploring a series of campaigns from other places around the world, countries, cities, wherever renters are organising. It gives us an opportunity to gather around and hear about the challenges and the triumphs that renters have in other places, including tonight in cities like Berlin, that Australians often point to as being so far ahead of us as a renting society. So why is there a campaign there at all? Well, there's an excellent book about the UK called The Rent Trap, and it gives this really powerful quote that I use a lot to help us understand the how and the why renting is the way it is here in Australia. And the quote is that people base their satisfaction on what they believe is possible. And what we're here for tonight, really, and in so much of the work of the Tenants Union, is to open up people's thinking to what they believe is possible as a renter in New South Wales. We believe that people should be able to feel safe and secure in their homes, of course, but more than that, we think people should be able to feel proud of their rented home. They should feel stable in their lives because their rented home gives them the kind of base for their life that everyone wants from their home. So the Make Renting Fair campaign is just one expression of our commitment, not just to hearing from renters about their experiences and bringing that forward, but bringing together a community to voice their belief in what is possible and raise really the whole community's expectations for what renting looks like in New South Wales. So let me tell you a little bit about the Make Renting Fair campaign before we get going properly and hear from Berlin. So in Australia, in 1975, as part of the Henderson poverty inquiries, there was a report by a lawyer named Sackville, who's now a justice, on law and poverty and the interaction between the two. And it covered a whole range of things, but in its renting section, it really laid out most of the basic structures of our Residential Tenancies Act that we rent under today in every state in Australia. The inquiry made a whole heap of recommendations about renting, from an independent bond board to habitability standards and heaps more. But they said, you know, there's this one recommendation we're going to make, and if you don't make it, it's going to undermine everything else that we've said and told you that you need to do. And guess what? It's the one recommendation that still has not been fully implemented in any state anywhere in Australia, and that is ending no grounds evictions. Since then, in New South Wales, we've had several iterations of the Tenancy Act, and most recently there was a review that started in 2015 and took about 3 or 4 years to finish. And that led to the original phase of the Make Renting Fair campaign in New South Wales, because government decided, again, not to address no grounds evictions. And that was really also a part of a wave of Make Renting Fair campaigns across the country. There was a whole bunch of reviews and a whole bunch of things happening in different states and territories that led to that. In New South Wales, we focused in on no grounds evictions in that first phase, because we see that combined with the lack of genuinely affordable alternatives for someone who's renting and isn't happy where they are, that is really the thing that undermines everything else about renting in New South Wales. In that first phase, we had a group of more than 100 community organisations and housing academics endorse the campaign, and thousands of renters who signed up and took action, emailed parliamentarians, signed petitions and all sorts of things. All of that did culminate in a vote in Parliament in 2018 on the question of getting rid of no grounds evictions. But unfortunately, it didn't get up, as you probably know. And so, of course, we're back to keep working, keep joining together to raise this as an issue. So we will be talking more about what the Make Renting Fair campaign looks like at the end and what the next steps are from here. But really, first, I am very excited to hear from our guest speaker, who is Carol. Carol Peterson is originally from Naarm, now known as Melbourne, has been living in Berlin since 2014. And by profession, she's a planning, monitoring and evaluation specialist for an NGO over there. But she's been involved in the English language working group of the Deutsche Wohnen und Co-Enteilen campaign since February 2021. So Carol's going to talk us through the campaign, and then we're going to have a Q&A session afterwards. In the Q&A, we're also going to be joined by Carol's colleague Lucas, who's also been part of the expropriate. The English translation is the expropriate Deutsche Wohnen und Co campaign, and he's a master's student at the Free University there. So Carol, thanks so much for coming, and I'm going to hand over to you.
It is really exciting to be telling this story here with you today. Just a little bit of background. So I'm not a housing specialist. I think there'll be more specialists on housing in the Zoom room today. But I joined the campaign in February this year, and I'm in the English language working group, so which brings together migrants from everywhere, all over the globe, who find English a bit more easy to speak than German in an organising context. So that's where I'm coming from. Should we start sharing the live? And I'm really looking forward to your questions as well. Trying to keep it really brief with the description of what's been happening, so that you can. Okay, so that's our logo. A few images. You can see our yellow and purple, which we've been painting the town with yellow and purple. Okay, so I'm going to talk about context, the actual detail of the referendum expropriation proposal, and then talk about the campaign structure and the story of the campaign. So some basic facts. So the rents are too high, there are too many evictions, it's impossible to find a new apartment. There have been lots of tenant organising initiatives in Berlin over the last 10, 15 years. And one of the groups, or several of them apparently at the same time, decided to use the tactic of using a referendum to expropriate the mega landlords. And we won. So that's what I'm presenting on. So just some more context, the density of Berlin is 4,227 inhabitants per square kilometre, compared with Sydney, which is 430 inhabitants. The footprint is 891 kilometres per kilometre versus Sydney, which is 12,000 plus. And you can infer from that most housing in Berlin is 5-storey apartment building, and there are some taller residential housing, mostly in the east and not exclusively. Just to give you a bit of a sense. You can see there our campaign bus in the middle of the houses at Gropiusstadt. And okay, so 85% of Berliners are tenants, and rents have been historically been very low. So wages are also really low, and so rent rises very quickly put a lot of stress on people. Welfare payments are low, pensions are low, particularly if you're from the east. It's a really quick. As soon as the rents rise, people really start to get stressed. Rent prices have doubled over the last 10 years, and got the fastest rising property rate prices in the world. So individual ownership of your apartment is not super common. Historically, people's landlords have been maybe a family or a company, may own 5 or 6 buildings, but obviously people did own their own apartments, but most apartments were not available for purchase. So over the last 10 years, what we've found is large asset management companies have been buying up these smaller groups of housing and sort of concentrating over 100,000 apartments in one company, in this case. And they started raising rent and turning over. So they buy houses where the rents are low, they know they can raise rents and make it quickly. And so what we have is this change in ownership. So whereas previously the owners of the apartments were investors investing for the long term and not expecting yearly profits, we've suddenly got this whole class of owners who want to pay out their shareholders every year. And so we've got, for example, Vonovia and Deutsche Wohnen are doubling their dividends to investors every year since 2000. So this is some context, and then the other context is that there are a lot of tenants self-organising and tenant sort of just the structure of tenant organising in the city, I think, is the basis. Also, the other basis. We have structures like the tenants union, which give like a legal centre for tenants. We've also got a group called Starthilfe, which Lucas is part of, and I'm hoping he'll be able to join us later. They help tenants who want to organise their neighbours by teaching them how to door knock, how to run a meeting, and a whole lot of local tenant initiatives. I've just listed a few. We'll probably talk about that more in the process. So there's a lot of people making a lot of noise about evictions, about rent rises, that sort of thing. Okay, so what is the referendum proposal? So a couple of weeks ago, everyone in Berlin went to the polls and they voted for all levels of government, and they voted in this referendum. The referendum was that all apartments that are owned by landlords that own more than 3,000 apartments would be expropriated. These apartments would then be handed over for ownership and management in a public company that would have democratic governance structures, including tenants, workers, and citizens, and that the compensation that they would be paid for this expropriation would be not the common good, so it would be calculated based on, not market value, but the common good. So calculated based on a price that could be paid by rents over 45 years while keeping those rents low. And this was all based on a section of the German Constitution, which enables expropriation for the common good. That has never been used for this purpose before, but a whole range of legal opinions says that this is an entirely legal proposition. So that was the referendum proposal, and this is our campaign sort of structure. We've got a general plenary that happens every 2 weeks. We have a whole series of working groups, one on public relations, we've got one on action, so making sure that we are ready for all the demos and our street stalls and street parties, socialisation and legal work, so drafting the law that we want the Parliament to pass after the referendum, signature collection, which is part of the process of getting the referendum up, a group working on door knocking and the jumpstart, the Starthilfe on teaching, organising, and the Right to the City, which is the English language working group. We've got localised kids teams. So in each neighbourhood, in each neighbourhood, there's a group of people organising the people in that neighbourhood to work on the various phases. And then there's a coordinating group. So the process we went through was, the first step was in, it says June 2019, maybe it was, yeah, okay. We needed to gather 20,000 signatures. We actually gathered 80,000. The second step was earlier this year, we had 4 months to gather 175,000 signatures, and we gathered 350,000. In the third step, which is the referendum 2 weeks ago, we needed a certain number of people to actually go to the polls and vote, and we needed to get at least 50% of voter turnout. So we actually got over 1 million people voting yes for expropriation. And then the next step is to get that, get our laws passed by the Senate. So how am I going for time? I think I can keep going.
About 8 minutes.
Okay, great. So then I've just got a few images from the campaign. So the signature collection phase, a lot of people hitting the streets with the petitions. It had to be paper-based. Very paper-based bureaucracy here in Germany. We can click through these pretty quickly. So argumentation training, going to where people are. So streets, lakes, shopping centres, train stations, all of this stuff. The kids teams going to various houses that are owned by Deutsche Wohnen. Okay, can we go back one? A quarter of the people in Berlin are not allowed to vote because we don't have German citizenship. And so one of the things we did, we had a demonstration to bring all the migrant organisations together who've been campaigning for the right to vote for years, decades. And under this banner of voting rights, housing, right to city for all. That's an image from that, and that will become relevant in a few slides on. So then this is that was the last previous slide was the celebration of the reaching the signature count. And then the next slide, forward. We worked out that 56,000 people voted for expropriation, but their signatures were invalid because they don't have citizenship. It's a bit of a part of what we did was scandalise this like a democracy and this disenfranchisement of the city in a campaign and keep going. So then we had, okay, we got the signatures. We know we're going to have a referendum proposal on the ballot. So then we have to turn out the votes. And we knew we needed around 600,000 yes votes, but we wanted to aim for 1 million because what we wanted was a real democratic, real message to be sent, a real political message, a political endorsement of expropriation. So we had to switch from signature gathering to actually talking to people about going to vote and about voting yes, and constantly having these conversations with people. And what we found both at the start of the signature collection phase and at the start of the vote turnout phase is that it was very slow. People were slow to take up big parts. But as people did them, they actually found that talking to people was actually fun and really great. More and more people became involved. And so we can click through these ones really fast. You can see we have these door hangers. That's a door knocking team. And we had 200,000, no, hundreds of thousands of newspapers printed. We had 2 buses that we would use to go and have a street festival. Take the bus, take all the people out to a particular set of houses and buildings. And the street festival, we had a cheerleading squad, which was really favoured by the press. The press loved these images. They would turn up to demonstrations and street festivals. And what else is here? Okay, we got a campaign film. I'll send the link around to that. They've got an enormous number of views on Facebook. And what else? Keep going. Yeah. Okay. So we're at election night. We have no idea how many Berliners are going to vote for expropriation. We have someone from our campaign, Keller. He's in the election studio. We've rented out the Universal Studios location, so we've got a huge screen up watching the tally, and we're just wondering, will we, what's going to happen? And then what was interesting is that there was a person representative from the real estate lobby there, who was just kind of clearly he knew that he, like the first moment that I knew that we may have won was that he was already speaking as if he was. So we were like, hang on a minute, what's going on? And so it turned out that we had quite clearly won. We were expecting a minor win. It's a really emphatic win. Next slide. Yeah, okay, so we can click through these. This is just some images of celebration. And now the next phase is we've got to pressure on the Senate to actually pass this law. And if we click through, you can see that we're already demonstrating. And there's two sort of roads we're looking at. Second referendum that will be legally binding, where the previous one was not legally binding, and also building socialisation from below. So can our kids' teams become local community councils? Can we start to have conversations about how we would manage if we had the power to do so? Yeah, and we can just click through there. Just some more images from the space. And now a question. Someone asked in the chat, when did it start? The actual Don't You Vote on Coin icon campaign started in 2018.
2018. So expropriation is a concept that's probably a little bit unfamiliar to everyone here. Could you just talk? You've mentioned it, but could you just talk a little bit about what does it look like to take these properties now, and what's the referendum really seeking?
Yeah, so I mean, the state expropriates things quite often. So, for instance, we just had a whole lot of houses expropriated in Berlin to build a freeway, not farm. And at the moment, there's a quite famous farmer who's resisting expropriation of his farm, which is on the edge of a brown coal mine in the West of Germany. And there's going to be a bit of a showdown there where he resists expropriation. So it's a tool that the state uses a lot. We're just suggesting that in this case, we should use it for common good. And so what's happening now is that we have a completed law that we want the Senate to pass, which would set the price at which the companies will be compensated, and which is low enough so that tenants would then be able to pay back the bonds that they to the companies in compensation. That it would be fair rent, and so that's the sort of the point that we're at now. We need that law to be passed. And we didn't want to like the campaign is not proposing renationalisation, because a lot of these houses were actually owned by the state. Right? We're not proposing renationalisation. We want a more democratic ownership after that expropriation happens. So it's just a forced change of ownership, I guess.
And I mean, the model of that democratic body that's going to, or is proposed to manage the buildings is a really interesting one. Could you talk a little bit about how the makeup of these councils?
Yeah. Okay. So there's 3 levels that are proposed, and this is the reason, actually, the reason why this referendum was not drafted as legally binding. It's more of a political temperature check. Because writing the statutes for this organisation is really complicated. Like trying to build in the levels of democracy is really complicated. So what we wanted is the tenants to be able to control their own building, have a say in the maintenance and renovation of their building. But also, we don't, you see, in Berlin, we had these cooperatives that were set up, housing cooperatives that were set up in the 1800s. And they provide hundreds of thousands of apartments, and they're not allowed to turn a profit. And so all of the rent is put into renovation. So really high quality housing, really affordable, a really great model. But it's like an elite club, so you can't join. It doesn't actually help us meet the housing needs of the city. The people who are most vulnerable to homelessness, who face racism when they're going to find a house, they cannot access this cooperative. So we wanted the democratic aspects of the new socialised housing to include responsiveness to the city's needs. So not just the tenants, but also the people who don't necessarily live in the house, have housing. And then obviously we need governance and financial oversight. So we've got these sort of 3 levels of governance, but it's in the process of being drafted. Some other so with Right to the City, we've been participating in this planning process by bringing in the perspective of people who are, obviously not me, but people who have experienced racial discrimination on the housing market, and also making sure there's going to be enough house to provide for refugees and asylum seekers, and dealing with violence against women issues, and also the transition for housing. How do we swap over the heating system? How do we protect from extreme weather? That kind of thing. When you have an organisation that's managing so many houses, the number of apartments that we are proposing to expropriate, or we think fall under this category of owned by landlords who own more than 3,000 apartments, is 240,000 apartments. It's a lot. We can work at scale, and that's useful when you're talking about climate change.
Thanks so much. So we're a little bit conscious that we're doing this at in the evening, and some of us have been on Zooms all day. So we thought we'd take a quick little break to let people have a bit of a stretch. I encourage you to stand up and have a little jiggle. But while we do that, we're also going to put up a quick little couple of polls just to give busy fingers something to do while we're having that stretch. And then we're going to come back and dive back into more questions. So if you've got some questions that you're burning to ask, make sure to stick them in the chat now so that we can put those to Carol. So the poll is open. Have a look at that, and just for 1 minute, we're going to stand up and have a little stretch. All right. Hope everyone's feeling a little bit, energized. Let's quickly go through the questions and see. We've got quite a few answers coming in, and we'll see where we how close everyone is. So the first question was the median amount paid by New South Wales renting households in the sector, according to our rent tracker, which it tracks bonds lodged into the Rental Bond Board, is actually closest to $25,000. It's just under $25,000 a year. Across New South Wales, it's in the high 24,000. Of course, in the middle of Sydney or in some areas, it's a lot higher. But across the state, $25,000 a year. So it's still a lot no matter where you are, and we should expect a good service. The number of households on the waiting list in New South Wales is 50,000. It's important to note households can be more than one person. So sometimes you'll hear government or others say that people on the waiting list is 50, but it's households, which may be a whole family. The number of new social homes the New South Wales government has committed to building over the next 10 years is closest to 10,000. The groups very accurately want to know, everyone's aware that we need this need, because in question 4, you can see the proportion of social housing to total housing has definitely dropped over the last 10 years. So everyone in the groups well aware of this. Something that people may not realize, and this is a test of the academic report as well, the number of additional genuinely affordable homes we need in New South Wales by 2036 was calculated by UNSW to be 315,000. So 535, we'd love to see that. Their calculation was 315 based on people who were in the lowest 40% of incomes who were living in rental stress at the moment, and adjusting for population. But the more we have, the better. And the proportion of Australian taxpayers who own one or more investment properties as of 2016, really split result here, which is interesting. It's actually closest to 15%. So it is at the lower end of that. Maybe it speaks to how dominant the landlording discourse is in Australia, but 15% is the number. Thanks so much. All right. Let's have a look at some questions that have been coming in. Alex asked, so he noted that renting is the norm in German culture. Majority of the population, particularly in a city like Berlin, rent versus owning. I'll skip the middle. How could the German case study sort of translate to the Australian market with these cultural differences in mind? I mentioned at the beginning, Carol, you lived in Naarm, now Melbourne, before you moved to Berlin. So I'll ask you first rather than try and answer myself. What do you see as the easiest way across?
I think that where we can share lessons and inspiration and where things are relevant is in the tactics that we use, the way we've organised, like the way things we did to organise that number of people to vote, 1 million people to vote for it, like the campaigning sort of stuff. I think is what is applicable in Australia, because the housing ownership model is so different and the legal system is so different. I think the actual sort of tactics of referendum is obviously not relevant, and because there's not concentration of ownership in such concentration of ownership. It's kind of you need a different strategy, but maybe some of the tactics will work.
Great. I've noticed we know Lucas is also joined the meeting, and if we can, Lucas, you're unmuted, so all good. What do you think of that question?
Hi everyone, sorry for being late. Technically, I'm still in my wage labor job right now, so I'm just sneaking out to be here. I actually don't know enough about the Australian housing market to really answer that, but I guess as that person has pointed out, Berlin is a city of renters, so there's a big difference there. I'm totally on Carol's side here. I think it's more a question of how like big campaigning can work when there's some common shared interest, and I think that's probably the most relevant part of it. I don't know.
Yeah. Thanks so much for both your answers. So I was wondering, Charlie asked, you've got the limit of 3,000. That's what the pitch was there. And Charlie was asking, will corporations now just, make a shell company, buy 2,999 properties, and then be in under the limit? Maybe, so really that's getting at, is there a way around this that people will try and take? But maybe in answering that, could you also tell us why 3,000 was picked as the level? I know there was a bit of thinking behind it. It wasn't a random number.
Do you want to take that, Lucas?
Sure. 3,000 actually is somewhat of a random number. Our interpretation of the law of Article 15 of the German Basic Law says that there needs to be some number, and basically constitutional scholars also agree that it can be somewhat arbitrary because you just need to draw a line somewhere. And 3,000 was just something that came out of a single discussion of like, well, who exactly are the people we want to target, and it still means that it's a sizable chunk of Berlin's rental market, right? It's like more than every 10th home, more than every 10th apartment. But yeah, basically it was out of a single discussion, and it's somewhat arbitrary, but we needed to do it. I'd love to go down. I mean, how can you justify owning 3,000 apartments, or 2,999, I guess, is not justifiable either. And to that part about splitting up and creating shell companies and all that, in our proposal, there is enough language apparently that this shouldn't be an issue, because also if you hold, I think, more than 10% of something, it would be counted as owning it or as being part owner, and then it would be counted to the total of units you hold. So it would be pretty difficult for them to actually weasel their way out of it.
think you're muted, Leo. But I was also going to say that obviously expropriation is not an uncontroversial topic in Germany, and I think having that really high number really was an easy way to make it make sense and make sure that the arguments of our opposition that we're threatening private property, we're threatening people who own their own houses. It made a really clear statement that they couldn't really get much traction with that. So it helped strategically in that way.
And so that really answered Sina's question. But on the flip side, what were the messages in the campaign that really resonated with people when you were campaigning, door knocking? What was, what kind of got people excited and into the whole referendum? Because you obviously convinced more than 1 million people.
I'll think of a few and then you can go, Lucas. Obviously, I was not doing the door knocking, so Lucas was doing the door knocking. My German is not good enough to persuade people about expropriation at this stage. So the main campaign slogan was "So that Berlin remains your home," and the main the main thing that people would say with signature collection was to keep rents low or to bring the cost of renting down, which is something that resonates with everyone, but 85%, right? It's really easy to make the argument in Berlin that rent should be lower, right? So that was the main sort of campaign message, but Lucas can probably add a bit more.
No, I think that's pretty much it. Like that was the core message, and that that the question of lower rents is tightly connected to the idea of being able to stay in your apartment. And I think that's something that's really an existential fear that people have, particularly the older population in Berlin. They can't imagine moving out of an apartment they had lived in 40 plus years. And I don't know whether you went into this, Carol, but I mean, a lot of the apartments we want to take back are ones that were privatized and people had been living in them for decades. Then they were privatized, and then within a span of 15 years, they see their rents double or even higher increases. So there's a real sense of anger, of betrayal, and there's this, yes, we want to just keep rents low or make them lower, but there's also this kind of real sense of taking the city back and taking your apartment back. Something belonged to you and now you have a chance of getting it back. And I think that was also something that resonated particularly with the people who had been living in these apartments in this former public housing stock.
I think that one thing that's really interesting in the differences is that in Berlin, when you move apartments, you have to take the whole kitchen with you, like everything. And what you leave is the pipe coming out of the wall for someone else to attach their sink to. So, and there might also be a stove that you leave behind. But that's because people literally did not move houses. Their contracts were without an end, and having a lease on an apartment was functionally the same as owning it. So you've got a much, compared to Australia, you've got a much higher sense of expectation and right to live undisturbed in an apartment for your whole life.
Yeah. We had a question in the chat, and I'll sort of paraphrase a little bit. Could a campaign here, if we focused on areas with high levels of tenancy, in Berlin, it's well known that it is a city of renters. There's a huge amount. How much do you think that changes the conversation? And so, would you expect that if in the Australian context, you might start in an area with really high level and then move out from there, or is that concept of the community and keeping the city the home enough to bring everyone along?
This is really, really tricky, because this is about like how do you transfer the strategies from Germany to Australia, and it's just so different. I would say that So we had a meeting with the Irish tenants union CATU a couple of weeks ago, because we're thinking about what to do with our keep team. So how do we transfer our keep teams, which have been mainly mobilising activists to go and talk to tenants, to actually become more bottom-up, tenant-run local councils. And so we spoke to the CATU people, because they're organising a much more similar situation to Australia. They're much more similar situation in Ireland than Australia. And they're going from door to door, joining members that way, also just from the internet. But I think if you're going to, I think going door to door is great, because that gives you everyone in a street. So even if they don't share the same landlord, they are neighbours and they can support each other, and they know what kind of local issues you've got. So, I mean, I think the door to door gives you that geographical kind of grouping. Even if the landlord isn't the same, you've still got that, you've got people you can get together in a room. And I think Lucas has been working with Stadthilfe on the tenant organising, where they go door to door in a whole building, bring them together in a room. So he might be able to have something to say about that.
I mean, again, I don't know enough about the Australian context, but it's true that we've been also doing kind of less big campaign work in the beginning. Particularly in the beginning, we were also doing just straight up like community organizing, essentially. And I think that there's an important relation though between the big campaign and the smaller projects. So in the beginning, when kind of the price increases really kicked off, they were usually done from the landlord side via something called energetic modernization. That makes no sense in English, I guess. It's basically they slap on insulation onto a building and then tell you, oh, you'll save so much on heating, and increase the rent like crazy. And this is basically the mechanism with that caused a lot of the huge price increases in Berlin's rental market. And we kind of went into individual neighborhoods and started organizing around this issue, and had some kind of small successes, preventing some of these modernizations, which are basically useless, or capping the rent increases. So we kind of won some small scale victories, but people realized, oh, if we ever want this to stop, this is a systemic issue. Like all the landlords are doing it. If we ever want this to stop, we need a kind of systemic answer. And that's like one part of the beginning of the expropriation campaign. And so I think there's this important relation between going door to door and talking about these very immediate concerns, and then developing a shared understanding that leads us to a larger campaign that maybe tackles, some more of the fundamentals of the issue. And so, yeah, there were several efforts in different parts of the city that were then connected in a kind of networking of these different organized tenant groups, and out of that grew the campaign. And I think maybe that's an important part of the story, that it wasn't just kind of the usual activists coming together, but it was actually kind of done with the tenants. And yeah, maybe that relation is something that can work in different contexts, where you go door to door, find out what really bothers people, and then out of that develop some shared understanding that can lead into bigger campaign work.
Thanks so much. So I think we'll just one last question, which we'll ask is, so what do you consider are the key wins coming out of the campaign outside of the victory vote itself? What else has been produced through this campaign?
And I think the vote that kind of consolidates a decade of organising and just puts us in a very, very strong position to keep organising. So in some ways, it's just one win in a series of wins, and a series of wins that I hope keep going. But I think probably the other thing that I think is the most important is the number of people who've been mobilised to go out and talk to their fellow tenants. So a whole lot of renters have been talking to a whole lot of renters, and that has really invigorated people because they've just seen how people from all walks of life have the same issues. And it's really kind of cut across a lot of divisions in the city and brought lots of groups together who don't normally speak to each other. And people find that really inspiring. Like, people do one door knock and then they keep going because they actually find those conversations really enriching. Yeah, I would say that. And then if we manage to do socialization from below, if we manage to do, you know, localized councils or whatever, we don't know what's going to happen in the next year, but that, you know, we're at a point where we can actually consider that after this.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for both of you for coming and sharing that wisdom. I think it's been really interesting and exciting. I think, you know, from a range of places around the world, we've all been watching Berlin and going, what's going on there? So it's really great to have you here with us. We appreciate your time. Everybody in the audience, we are going to now quickly, before people start popping off, grab a picture of everyone who's here. So if you don't want to be on camera, this is your opportunity to turn off your camera and or step away. But we're going to take the picture once we've sort of fiddled with the images a little bit. And then I'm going to hand back to Riley to talk through the next steps. So Riley, can you let me know when you're ready?
I've taken you off the spotlight, so everyone should be able to switch the view to gallery view now to see everyone's beautiful faces. Yeah. I don't think I can change other people's view.
Yeah, no problem. So long as you can see everyone. So everyone knows I'll do a 5-4 countdown in a second, that we'll be taking a picture. Yeah, smile for your landlord. Make whatever gesture you feel is appropriate at the moment. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Awesome. All right. Thanks so much. And now I'm going to hand back to Riley to wrap us up and do our next steps.
Thanks, Leo. Yeah, just to echo Leo's thanks so much to both of you for coming and sharing. I learned a lot. Very exciting, very inspiring. I wish we could have something even close or vaguely like that here. But yeah, I don't know about everyone else. I'm feeling pretty energized. So yeah, thank you so much. In terms of our next steps going from here, I have really enjoyed tonight's event, and you'll be pleased to know that this is not the last. This is just the first. We're going to have at least one more before the end of the year, possibly more than one, hearing from other renter organisers in other jurisdictions, including potentially some that are a little more similar to our own, like over in New Zealand. So that should give us kind of a different array of learnings, which I'm excited about. So watch this space. If you're on the Make Renting Fair mailing list, I will be emailing you about that, and also follow our socials. Another thing I just wanted to kind of flag, we are, with the campaign relaunch, building a new, shiny new website. And one of the things that we really would love to get from people to help make that website as beautiful as it can be is some of your renter stories. I'm sure most of the people in this Zoom tonight are renters. And unfortunately, with the state of the New South Wales renting system, there's a pretty good chance a good proportion of you have had a less than great renting experience, or have a story to share that kind of highlights some of the awfulness and some of the things that need to be fixed. So I'm going to share a link in the chat to our Share Your Story form, where I would love it if you have a renting story to share, if you might be happy to share that with us, either for our website. We also sometimes use them for submissions, or sometimes, you know, all within what you yourself are comfortable with, sharing with interested journalists for the media as well. I see some faces in here of people who have already graciously shared their story with me for that. So thank you so much. The last thing to flag as well is we are today launching a petition, which I kind of gave a soft launch to everyone who's on the email list earlier this week. I'm going to share that in the chat now. And I am wondering if everyone who came tonight would be willing to make somewhat of a very small, easy, doable commitment to us here now that you will sign the petition if you haven't already. I know about 25 of you already have, thank you. And also then either share across on a social media or all of the social medias, or if you're not on socials, share in like a text, an email, smoke signal with 2 friends and ask them to sign it as well. Can I get, if you can see your reactions, can I get a reaction from everyone who's going to make that commitment right now to sign that petition and share it with somebody? I'm seeing some hearts, I'm seeing some thumbs up. I want to see a whole big sea of hearts and thumbs up. Maybe a little party react as well. Cool. And oh, we need to remove that other petition that I think is no longer live. Thank you for that heads up. Finally, if you are not on the Make Renting Fair email list, but you would like to be, you can either email to contact@rentingfair.org.au or just private message me now with your name and your email address, and I can add you onto that. It's updates maybe every 2 to 4 weeks about what's going on. So that is kind of the official event wrapped up. Thank you so much to all of you for coming.